The news came to me on a quiet afternoon, the kind that feels ordinary until it changes everything. I remember sitting by the window of my small apartment, watching the sunlight stretch lazily across the floor, when the doctor's words settled into my heart with a weight I couldn't ignore. I was pregnant. For a long moment, the world seemed to pause, as if waiting for me to catch up with it. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear alone, but from the realization that life had just taken a turn I never imagined. His name was Ian, my college professor, a man known not only for his intelligence but also for his calm presence. He had a way of explaining the most complicated ideas with patience, making even the most lost students feel capable. To everyone else, he was simply a teacher, but to me, he had become something more over time. It hadn't happened suddenly. There were no dramatic moments or grand confessions. It was in the quiet conversations after class, the thoughtful advice, the way he listened when I spoke about my dreams and fears. Somewhere between those moments, respect had turned into something deeper. I knew the situation was complicated. People often see things in black and white, but life rarely fits into such simple lines. We had never crossed any boundaries while I was a student. Our connection had remained unspoken, carefully guarded by both of us. It was only after my final exams, when I was no longer under his academic supervision, that we allowed ourselves to acknowledge what had been growing silently between us. Even then, we were cautious, aware of how easily misunderstandings could arise. When I told him about the pregnancy, I expected shock, maybe even hesitation. Instead, he stood still for a moment, absorbing the truth, before stepping closer with a seriousness I had never seen before. There was no anger, no confusion, just a quiet determination in his eyes. He asked me if I was afraid, and I nodded, unable to form the right words. My fears were not just about the future, but about judgment, about how the world would look at us. He didn't let me stay in that fear for long. He took responsibility in a way that felt both overwhelming and comforting. Without hesitation, he said we would face this together. He didn't speak in rushed promises or dramatic declarations. Instead, his voice carried a steady certainty that made me believe him. He spoke about marriage, not as an escape from the situation, but as a commitment to building a life together, one based on honesty and respect. The days that followed were filled with a mix of emotions. There were moments of doubt, of course. I questioned whether we were making decisions too quickly, whether we were ready for the life ahead. But every time uncertainty crept in, Ian's presence reminded me that this wasn't about rushing into something blindly. It was about choosing to stand by each other when it mattered most. Our wedding was simple, far from the grand celebrations people often dream of. There were no elaborate decorations or large gatherings. It was a quiet ceremony, attended by a few close family members who mattered to us. Some were surprised, others had questions, but in the end, what mattered was the promise we made to each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Adjusting to married life was not without its challenges. We came from different routines, different ways of living. I was still finding my place in the world, while he had already built a stable career. There were moments when our differences became evident, when small disagreements felt larger than they were. But through it all, there was a mutual understanding that we were learning, growing together. Pregnancy itself brought its own set of changes. There were days when I felt strong and hopeful, imagining the future with excitement. Then there were days when exhaustion and uncertainty took over. During those moments, Ian remained patient. He didn't try to fix everything or offer solutions to every problem. Sometimes, he simply sat beside me, offering a quiet kind of support that spoke louder than words. As time passed, I began to see him not just as the professor I once admired, but as a partner who was learning alongside me. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but there was sincerity in his efforts, a willingness to be present even when things felt difficult. That sincerity became the foundation of our relationship. One evening, as we sat together watching the sky change colors at sunset, I asked him if he ever regretted how things turned out. It was a question that had been lingering in my mind for weeks. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with a calm expression, as if carefully choosing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. He said that life doesn't always follow the plans we make, but that doesn't mean it leads us to the wrong place. He told me that meeting me had changed him in ways he never expected, and that he didn't see our situation as a mistake, but as a responsibility and a blessing. His words stayed with me long after that conversation ended. They helped me see our journey from a different perspective. Instead of focusing on how unexpected everything was, I began to appreciate the strength it had brought into our lives. We were not defined by how our story began, but by how we chose to continue it. As the months went by, the reality of becoming parents grew closer. We prepared in small ways, setting up a space in our home, talking about the kind of life we wanted to provide for our child. There were moments of laughter, moments of nervousness, and moments of quiet reflection. Through it all, our bond deepened, shaped by shared experiences and a growing sense of purpose. The day our child was born was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was overwhelming, emotional, and filled with a kind of joy that is difficult to describe. When I first held the baby in my arms, I felt a connection that went beyond words. Ion stood beside me, his expression soft, as if he too was realizing the magnitude of that moment. Life after that day was different in every way. Our priorities shifted, our routines changed, and we found ourselves navigating a new chapter together. It wasn't always easy. There were sleepless nights, moments of stress, and times when we felt completely exhausted. But there was also a sense of fulfillment that made everything worthwhile. Looking back, I realized that our story was not about perfection or ideal circumstances. It was about resilience, about choosing to stand together despite uncertainty. It was about finding love in unexpected places and nurturing it through patience and understanding. People may have their opinions about how our journey began, but they don't see the quiet moments that define our life now. They don't see the way we support each other, the way we've grown together, or the love that has taken shape over time. And perhaps they don't need to. What matters is what we know, what we've built, and the future we continue to create together. In the end, love is not always about grand beginnings or perfect timing. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in the middle of uncertainty, asking us to trust it. And if we are brave enough to do so, it can lead us to a life more meaningful than we ever imagined.